Trumpets echo through the castle walls, but they herald no victory. Instead, they signal the most shocking scandal in the kingdom's history. The elderly queen is with child, and the whispers name a young peasant gardener as the father. A man who dares to claim it was born not of deception or ambition, but love. As the kingdom erupts in outrage, two hearts stand against the full force of tradition, class, and power. It is not a crime to love, the peasant declares before his accusers, his voice unwavering despite the executioner's shadow looming behind him, even when that love scandalizes kings and princes. But when ancient night watch logs emerge, confirming the peasant's secret visits to the royal chambers, the queen faces an impossible choice: deny her heart to keep her crown, or embrace a truth that could destroy everything she's built over 30 years of rule. And as the council conspires in shadowed chambers, one question haunts the entire kingdom. What happens when love defies not just tradition, but the very foundations upon which their world is built? The trumpet's wail pierced the castle courtyard like a knife to flesh, each note carrying not triumph, but dread. Blood drained from faces as the sound echoed off stone walls that had witnessed centuries of royal secrets. This announcement was different. The queen's belly now swelled with child, a miracle that should have brought joy but instead unleashed terror. Her weathered hands, marked with age spots and veins that mapped decades of rule, now cradled a secret that threatened to tear the kingdom apart. Guards dragged a young man through the muddy streets, his threadbare clothes soaking up the filth. Villagers pressed against each other, their breath fogging the chill morning air as they whispered his name: Elias, a simple peasant whose calloused hands had somehow touched royal skin. Women clutched their children closer as he passed, as though his transgression might be contagious. But what shocked them most wasn't his crime. It was his face. No fear, no shame, just a quiet defiance that made even the most pious look away first. The young man's heart hammered against his ribs, each beat a reminder that he was still alive. For now. A bead of cold sweat trickled down his spine, but he refused to tremble. He caught fragments of conversation as they pushed him forward. Witches' magic, royal deception, treason of the flesh. The words stung like nettles, yet beneath his composure a memory surfaced. Her fingers intertwined with his, her whisper against his ear. They'll never understand what we've created. That truth burned inside him, hotter than any fear. Inside the great hall, nobility gathered like vultures, their silk garments rustling as they jostled for position. The air hung heavy with perfumed bodies and sour breath. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting blood-red patterns across stone floors that had been scrubbed by servants before dawn. Lord Harwick's eyes narrowed as he watched the peasant enter, his jeweled fingers tightening around his goblet until his knuckles turned white. "Bring the defiler forward," he commanded, voice slicing through the murmurs. Two guards shoved Elias to his knees. Pain shot through his legs as they struck stone, yet no sound escaped his lips. He raised his gaze, taking in the ornate tapestries depicting battles won and enemies vanquished. How strange that the greatest battle now raged within these walls, not with swords, but with whispers and scandal. His nostrils flared at the mingled scents of beeswax candles, spilled wine, and fear, the unmistakable stench of judgment. "You stand accused of the most heinous crime," Lord Harwick declared, his voice carrying to every corner. "To defile our queen, to plant your common seed where only royal blood should flow." Spittle flew from his mouth with each venomous word. The crowd's collective breath caught, anticipating the peasant's inevitable denial, his pleas for mercy that would never come. Instead, Elias rose slowly to his feet. A guard moved to force him down again, but something in the young man's demeanor made him hesitate. The hall fell silent, even the rats in the walls seeming to pause their scurrying. "I deny nothing," Elias stated, his voice clearer and stronger than anyone expected from a man of his station. "The child the queen carries is mine." The words hung in the air like a drawn blade. Women gasped, men cursed, and somewhere in the back, glass shattered as a servant dropped a tray. Lord Harwick's face contorted, veins bulging at his temples. "You admit to this treachery? You confess to forcing yourself upon our sovereign? His accusation carried the promise of torture, of a death so slow it would become legend. Elias felt something shift inside him. Not fear, but a fierce resolve that straightened his spine and steadied his voice. I have never forced anything upon anyone, my lord. His gaze swept across the hostile faces. What grew between the queen and myself was planted by neither trickery nor violence, but by something you cannot execute or burn or hang. His chest tightened, making each word a struggle. It was planted by love. The word love exploded through the hall like wildfire. Courtiers recoiled as though struck. A clergyman crossed himself hurriedly. The scandal of a peasant claiming not just the queen's body but her heart threatened the very foundations of their world. Lord Harwick's face purpled dangerously, a vein throbbing at his temple like a living thing trying to escape. Blasphemy! Shouted a priest, his voice cracking. Lies from the devil's tongue. Elias stood unmoved, his eyes finding those of an elderly noblewoman whose fingers trembled against her lips. She had been the queen's confidant for decades. Did she know? Did she suspect? The flicker in her gaze suggested secrets kept and promises made that even she was struggling to understand. The great doors at the end of the hall groaned open. Conversations died mid-word as the queen herself entered, her steps measured and deliberate. Her silver hair was bound in an elaborate crown of braids, and her gown of deep burgundy draped over the subtle curve of her belly. 30 years of rule had etched lines around her eyes and mouth, yet in this moment she appeared both vulnerable and formidable. Guards and nobles alike bowed, the movement automatic despite the scandal hanging in the air. Elias did not bow, not out of disrespect, but because something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement that transcended protocol. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, their eyes locked across the crowded hall. Your Majesty, Lord Harwick began, struggling to maintain decorum. This peasant has made outrageous claims. I am aware of what he claims. The queen interrupted, her voice steady despite the slight tremble in her aged hands. The court held its collective breath, waiting for her to denounce the peasant, to call for his head, to restore order to their fractured world. Instead, she remained silent, her hand drifting to rest upon the small swell of her belly. That single gesture, protective, intimate, undeniable, sent shock waves through the assembly. What she did not say spoke volumes louder than any proclamation. This cannot be, whispered a duchess, the words escaping before she could contain them. The queen's silence was neither confirmation nor denial. It was a wall between her private truth and public duty, built brick by brick over decades of rule. Yet now that wall showed cracks that threatened to bring down the entire kingdom. Elias felt a tightness in his throat, remembering stolen moments in shadowed corridors, her laughter like a girl's when they spoke of simple things, bread baking, summer rain, dreams that had nothing to do with thrones. How strange that their most intimate secret now lay exposed before those who could never comprehend its depth. Take him to the dungeons, Lord Harwick ordered, breaking the unbearable silence. The council will decide his punishment at dawn. As rough hands seized his arms, Elias found his voice once more. You may imprison my body, he called out, loud enough for all to hear. But what exists between the queen and myself cannot be contained by stone walls or iron bars. His eyes never left hers as they dragged him backward. I love her, and I will proclaim it until my final breath. The queen's face remained impassive, a mask perfected through years of court intrigue. But those closest to her noticed something alarming, a single tear that escaped to trace a path down her weathered cheek. The tiny droplet contained more truth than all the proclamations and denials combined, and the sight of it turned their certainty to ash. What fate awaited a peasant who dared to love a queen? What would become of a ruler who allowed her heart to betray her crown? As the doors closed behind Elias, these questions hung in the air like storm clouds before thunder, promising that the true tempest had only just begun. The sun had barely risen when they dragged Elias through the city streets, his wrists raw from iron shackles that bit deeper with every stumble. Mud splattered his threadbare tunic as guards shoved him forward, parading his shame before the awakening capital. The cobblestones, still slick with morning dew, caused his bare feet to slide and bleed, leaving crimson footprints like a grotesque trail of his journey from dungeon to public square. "There he is! The Queen's whore!" A woman's voice sliced through the morning fog, sharp as a butcher's knife. She spat, the warm glob landing on his cheek and sliding down like a tear he refused to shed. Elias kept his gaze fixed ahead, his jaw clenched so tight that pain radiated into his temples. The crowd grew with each step, swelling from dozens to hundreds, their faces contorting with emotions that ranged from disgust to perverse fascination. "My sister served in the castle kitchens," a red-faced merchant shouted, pushing closer. "Says he bewitched the Queen with peasant magic." The accusation rippled through the crowd, morphing and expanding with each whispered retelling. Children darted between adult legs, pointing and chanting rhymes already composed to mock him. Simple, cruel verses about a farm boy and a barren queen. Their high voices pierced him more deeply than the rocks occasionally thrown his way. Yet amid the sea of hatred, Elias caught glimpses of something else, furtive looks that carried not condemnation, but something dangerously close to understanding. An old woman crossed herself before meeting his gaze, her eyes softening momentarily before she ducked away. A young miller lowered his head in what might have been respect rather than disgust. These small mercies were scattered breadcrumbs in a forest of contempt, barely enough to sustain hope, but somehow forcing his spine straighter, his steps more deliberate. "I wonder if they'll cut it off before they hang him." A youth snickered, loud enough to ensure Elias heard. Laughter erupted, coarse and cruel. Elias felt his stomach clench, not from fear but from a surge of anger that threatened to crack his carefully maintained composure. He wanted to roar back at them, to ask if any had ever loved so deeply that nothing else, not class, not tradition, not even life itself, mattered in comparison. Inside the castle, Queen Eleanor paced her chambers, each step measured as if walking a tightrope between worlds. Her private quarters had become a luxurious prison, with guards for her protection stationed outside her doors. The morning light cast long shadows through leaded windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like the court rumors, impossible to grasp or dispel. Her handmaiden, Marta, moved silently about the room, fear making her usually deft fingers clumsy as she arranged the Queen's breakfast tray. "Have they heard him?" Eleanor finally asked, her voice barely audible, cracking the silence like thin ice beneath a cautious foot. Marta's hands trembled as she poured tea. "Your Majesty should not concern herself with, 'Have they heard him?'" The Queen's repetition carried steel beneath silk. Her hand unconsciously moved to her belly, a gesture that made Marta avert her eyes. "They say he remains unharmed, Your Majesty. Physically." Marta chose her words with painful precision. "But they parade him through the streets. The people—" She trailed off, unable to describe the savagery of public opinion. Eleanor's face remained impassive, a skill perfected through 3 decades of ruling alongside a husband who had valued her political acumen but never her heart. Only the slightest whitening of knuckles as she gripped the windowsill betrayed her inner turmoil. Below, she could see the distant movement of the crowd, knowing Elias was at its center, enduring humiliation that should have broken any ordinary man. "The council presses for your public denial," Marta continued, her voice dropping to a whisper despite the room's emptiness. "Lord Harwick drafts proclamations declaring the child to be the late king's posthumous heir." She hesitated before adding, "Some nobles speak of regency arrangements should you be found unfit." The word unfit hung in the air between them, laden with threat. A queen could rule, a queen could even age, but a queen who took a peasant lover, who carried his child, was a queen who had lost her mind in the eyes of the nobility. Eleanor had survived court intrigue, foreign wars, and her husband's death, but this silence, her refusal to deny Elias's claim, threatened everything she had built. "And what does the common folk say?" Eleanor asked, her voice steadier than her heart. Marta hesitated. "They are divided, Your Majesty. Some call for the peasant's death. Others—" She swallowed hard. "Others whisper that perhaps love knows no station." A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips and vanished. The common people, those who lived lives dictated by necessity rather than tradition, might understand what the nobility could never accept. That loneliness had nearly killed her, until Elias had awakened something she thought long dead. Back in the city square, the guards forced Elias to his knees. The crowd formed a circle around him, their faces blurring into a wall of judgment. A court official unrolled a parchment, reading charges in a voice that carried to the farthest corners. Treason against the crown, violation of royal blood, corruption of the queen's virtue, crimes punishable by death in ways designed to maximize suffering. Elias felt sweat trickle down his back despite the morning chill. His mouth had dried to parchment, his tongue thick and useless. They wanted him to beg, to grovel, to renounce his claims and declare himself a liar. It would be the sensible choice, perhaps even earn him a quicker death. But as the official's words washed over him, Elias found himself transported to the royal garden 6 months earlier, where he had first spoken to the queen while repairing a stone wall. She had approached alone, dismissed her ladies with a gesture, and asked about the wildflowers he had planted between the stones. Not demanded, asked. She had listened as though his knowledge of simple blossoms held value equal to state secrets. That conversation had led to others, each more intimate than the last, until words gave way to touches, and touches to something neither had dared name until it became impossible to deny. "The accused will respond to the charges," the official demanded, jerking Elias back to the present. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for his degradation or defiance. It mattered little which, so long as it entertained. Elias raised his head, meeting the official's gaze with unexpected steadiness. "I have nothing to deny," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the sudden hush. "I am no traitor to the crown. I have loved the woman beneath it, not the power it represents." Murmurs erupted like startled birds. Such distinction was dangerous, radical even. It separated Eleanor the woman from Eleanor the queen, suggesting she existed beyond her role, that she might have needs and desires unconnected to her duties. For some in the crowd, this was more threatening than the physical act itself. "Blasphemer!" someone shouted, but another voice countered, "Let him speak." The division was a hairline crack in what had seemed solid condemnation. Emboldened, Elias continued, "It is not a crime to love, even when that love scandalizes kings and princes." His words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that could not be called back. "Judge me for loving truly, if you must, but know that in doing so, you judge yourselves for never having loved at all." That night, as darkness claimed the kingdom, a kitchen girl slipped through shadow-drenched corridors, her footsteps barely audible on cold stone. The guards at Elias's cell were not the most vigilant, men assigned punishment duty for various infractions, more interested in the flask they passed between them than in a prisoner destined for execution. She waited until their laughter grew louder, their movements sloppier, before approaching with a covered tray. "For the prisoner," she muttered, eyes downcast. "Orders from above." The younger guard frowned. "He's to have bread and water only." She lifted the edge of the cloth covering the tray, revealing fresh bread still warm from the ovens. "And so he shall. Better bread than yesterday's moldy scraps, but bread nonetheless." She offered a smile that suggested more than food might be available for guards who showed kindness, and the men exchanged glances before the older one shrugged and unlocked the cell door. Elias sat against the damp wall, his eyes adjusting to the light from the guard's torch. The girl set down the tray and, with movements so swift they seemed rehearsed, slipped a folded parchment beneath the bread before retreating. The door clanged shut behind her, locks turning, footsteps fading. With trembling fingers, Elias retrieved the note. The parchment was fine, the handwriting elegant yet rushed, as though written in stolen moments between obligations. "Your silence kills me, your voice saves me." Below these words was no signature, yet he would have recognized the hand anywhere, had seen it signing proclamations and treaties, had watched it move across his skin in darkness. For the first time since his arrest, Elias allowed tears to fall, silent tracks down dirt-streaked cheeks. They were not tears of fear or despair, but of a recognition that transcended his understanding, that their impossible love had become a weapon in a game whose rules neither of them had written. In the shadowed corners of the castle, nobles gathered in whispered consultation. If love could not be destroyed by public humiliation, perhaps it could be weaponized. Lord Harwick's deep voice rumbled behind closed doors. The peasant's devotion makes him dangerous, but also useful. If he truly loves her, how far might he go to protect her? And what might we accomplish if that devotion were redirected? The Game of Thrones had found a new piece to manipulate, and Elias was only beginning to comprehend that his heart had become a battlefield for powers beyond his imagination. Torchlight cast monstrous shadows across the great hall as the royal council gathered, their faces hardened by privilege and power. The massive oak table, polished by generations of servants until it gleamed like dark water, dominated the center of the room. Around it sat 20 of the kingdom's most influential figures, each chair representing a pillar of authority that had stood unshaken for centuries until a peasant's love threatened to topple them all. Lord Harwick's fingers drummed a nervous rhythm against the wood, the sound amplified by the cathedral-like acoustics of the space. His rings, 5 in total, each symbolizing a different family alliance, caught the light with every movement. The air hung heavy with the scent of beeswax candles and tension so thick it seemed to press against the tapestry-lined walls. "This abomination cannot stand," declared Bishop Matthias, his corpulent frame straining against embroidered vestments. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the evening chill. "The church cannot, will not, recognize a child born of such perversion." He spat the last word, small flecks of saliva landing on the table's surface. "A queen who takes a commoner to her bed commits not just treason against the crown, but sin against God himself." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table, though Lady Cecily, the queen's cousin by marriage, narrowed her eyes. "Yet it would not be the first time royalty has strayed," she observed, her voice quiet but cutting. "When King Richard took his hunting lodge girls, I recall no such outrage from the church." The bishop's face flushed deeper. "The king's indiscretions produced no heirs that threatened the bloodline. So it is not morality that concerns you, but bloodlines," Lady Cecily pressed, earning glares from several councilmen. Lord Harwick slammed his palm against the table, silencing the exchange. "Enough. The issue before us is not past indiscretions but present crisis. The queen carries a child she has not denied is fathered by a peasant. The succession, the very stability of the realm, hangs in the balance." Baron Westfield, whose merchant wealth had purchased his title 3 generations prior, leaned forward. The candlelight gleamed against his baldness, creating the illusion of a second, smaller moon hovering above the table. "My ships bring word that our enemies already mock us. The Valencian ambassador jokes that perhaps all their farmers should apply for positions in our royal bedchambers." This earned nervous laughter quickly suppressed by Harwick's glare. Lord Treasurer Morris cleared his throat, his quill scratching against parchment as he tallied invisible numbers. "Trade alliances grow uncertain. 3 marriage proposals for Princess Sophia have been quietly withdrawn. No one wishes to ally with a house whose bloodline may be compromised. The people must see strength, not scandal," added Commander Blackwood, his weathered face bearing scars from battles that had secured the kingdom's borders. His hand, missing 2 fingers from a siege years earlier, rested on his sword hilt. "My soldiers whisper when they think I cannot hear. Some laugh, others wonder if a peasant could rise so high. Why not they? Discipline fractures when monarchy appears weak." The council chamber door swung open without warning, and all conversation ceased as if severed by a blade. Queen Eleanor entered, her steps measured, her silver-streaked hair arranged in a crown of braids beneath a simple circlet of gold. She wore no ornate gown, but a dress of deep purple, royal yet understated, with only her signet ring as adornment. The swell of her belly, though modest, was undeniable beneath the fabric. The men rose as protocol demanded, though the scrape of chairs against stone floor sounded reluctant. Lady Cecily, the only other woman present, executed a curtsy that somehow managed to convey both respect and solidarity. "My lords." "My lady," Eleanor acknowledged, her voice neither apologetic nor confrontational. "I understand you discuss matters concerning my person." "Your Majesty," Lord Harwick began, his tone carefully balanced between deference and authority. "We discuss matters concerning the realm." matters which your condition has brought to crisis point. Eleanor's gaze swept the room, noting who met her eyes and who looked away. She had ruled beside her husband for 27 years and alone for 3 more. These men had bowed to her, sworn oaths to her, sought her favor and feared her displeasure. Yet now they regarded her as something alien, a woman who had stepped beyond the carefully constructed boundaries of her role. "Then I shall join your discussions," she stated, moving toward the empty chair at the head of the table, her rightful place, which they had deliberately left vacant. "As I remain your queen." The emphasis on the last word hung in the air like the moment before thunder follows lightning. Bishop Matthias shifted uncomfortably, his rings clinking against the wooden armrest as Eleanor seated herself with the practiced grace of one who had spent a lifetime in the public eye. "Your Majesty," the bishop began, his voice adopting the unctuous tone he reserved for sermons to wealthy patrons, "the council has concerns about the paternity of the child you carry." "So I have heard," Eleanor replied, her face betraying nothing. Decades of diplomatic negotiations had taught her that revealing emotion was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. "The peasant Elias has made claims," Lord Harwick started. "Claims he has not denied when facing death," Commander Blackwood interrupted, his bluntness earning him a sharp look from several counselors. "A man facing the executioner's axe rarely clings to lies." "Unless the lie serves some greater purpose," suggested Baron Westfield, stroking his pointed beard. "Perhaps certain enemies of the crown have recruited this peasant to create division, to weaken us from within." Eleanor's hands remained folded in her lap, but those watching closely might have noticed her knuckles whitening. "And what evidence supports this theory, Baron?" she asked, her voice level. "Evidence?" The Baron's laugh was short and harsh. "What greater evidence than the absurdity of the claim itself? A queen of your age and wisdom falling for a common laborer. It defies reason." "Unlike reason, the heart does not bow to council votes," Eleanor replied, causing Lady Cecily to hide a smile behind her hand. The atmosphere in the room thickened further, charged with unspoken accusations and ancient prejudices. Lord Treasurer Morris shuffled his papers nervously, the rustle audible in the tense silence that followed the Queen's words. "Your Majesty," Lord Harwick finally said, each syllable careful as a man crossing thin ice, "the Council has prepared a proclamation declaring the child to be the late King's posthumous heir. Medical authorities will attest to the possibility of delayed quickening. The people will accept this explanation, and the succession will remain unchallenged." "And Elias?" Eleanor asked, the first time she had spoken the name aloud in the Council's presence. The sound of it seemed to drop like a stone into still water, creating ripples of discomfort around the table. "The peasant would be quietly dispatched," Commander Blackwood stated, his military mind viewing it as a tactical necessity rather than murder, "for the good of the realm." "I see." Eleanor's voice revealed nothing of the cold dread that spread through her chest at these words. "And if I refuse to endorse this falsehood?" Bishop Matthias spread his hands in a gesture of false compassion. "Then, with the deepest regret, the Council would be forced to consider whether your Majesty's judgment has been compromised by your condition. A regency might be required until the child's birth and your Majesty's recovery." The threat was clear: deny Elias or lose her throne, possibly permanently. Eleanor had survived 3 decades of court intrigue, foreign invasions, and assassination attempts, but never had the danger been so intimate, so entwined with her own heart. Before she could respond, a messenger burst into the chamber, face flushed from running. He knelt quickly, extending a sealed parchment toward Lord Harwick rather than the Queen, a breach of protocol that spoke volumes about where power was shifting. "My lord, urgent news from the Night Guard." Harwick broke the seal, his eyes widening as they scanned the contents. Without a word, he passed the message to Commander Blackwood, whose scarred face darkened like a thundercloud. "What news comes that bypasses your queen?" Eleanor demanded, her voice carrying the authority that had once made ambassadors tremble. Blackwood hesitated, then placed the parchment before her. "The Night Watch logs, Your Majesty. Meticulously kept." They show that the peasant Elias entered your private chambers on 17 separate occasions over the past 8 months, always after midnight, always leaving before dawn. Murmurs erupted around the table, no longer bothering with pretense of respect. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, but years of rulership kept her expression neutral as she scanned the damning evidence, dates, times, notes from guards who had been sworn to secrecy, but whose loyalty had evidently been purchased. "There can be no more denial," Lord Harwick declared, addressing the council rather than Eleanor. "The evidence confirms the peasant's claims." "It confirms he visited Her Majesty's chambers," Lady Cecily interjected. "The purpose of those visits remains." "Do not insult our intelligence further," Baron Westfield snapped. "We are discussing a scandal that threatens the very foundation of the monarchy, not arranging flowers for a summer festival." Eleanor rose slowly, commanding attention without raising her voice. "You speak of scandal and succession, of bloodlines and propriety. Not one among you speaks of the possibility that after 30 years of duty to crown and kingdom, I found something none of my privileged position could provide." Her hand rested briefly on her belly. "Not one considers that this child might be born of something more valuable than political calculation." The council stared at her in stunned silence. For a queen to speak of personal feelings in matters of state was unprecedented, almost incomprehensible to men who viewed monarchy as an institution rather than a life lived. "Your Majesty." Bishop Matthias recovered first, his voice dripping with condescension. "Such sentiments are understandable in your condition. Women in your delicate state often experience emotional excesses. My condition," Eleanor replied with dangerous softness, "does not diminish my crown, Bishop. Nor does it render my word less law than it was a year ago." She turned toward the door. "I will consider your counsel. Until then, the peasant Elias remains unharmed." As she departed, the whispers behind her back grew louder, bolder. She caught fragments. "Unfit, besotted old woman, Regency Council." In the corridor outside, alone for a precious moment, Eleanor pressed a hand against the cold stone wall to steady herself. Rumors had already begun circulating among the servants. She could see it in their averted eyes, their hushed conversations that ceased when she approached. Hidden in shadow, a figure watched the Queen's momentary weakness. A court page whose loyalties had been purchased by gold slipped into his palm by Lord Harwick himself. The boy noted how the Queen's fingers trembled, how she squared her shoulders before continuing down the corridor. This information would be worth additional silver when reported to his patron. The conspiracy to control the throne had begun in earnest, and Eleanor's silence, her refusal to deny Elias, had become the weapon her enemies would use to destroy them both. Dawn broke over the kingdom, painting the execution square in sickly golden light. Dew glistened on the wooden platform erected overnight, the moisture seeping into fresh-cut timber that would soon drink deeper stains. Merchants set up stalls along the perimeter, hawking meat pies and ale to the gathering crowd. Executions were good for business, especially ones promising such unprecedented spectacle. The bells tolled 6 times, each resonant peal drawing more spectators until the square swelled with bodies pressing against each other for better views. Children perched on parents' shoulders, old women elbowed their way to the front, and nobles watched from cushioned seats on nearby balconies, sipping warmed wine despite the early hour. Elias emerged from the prison cart, chains binding his wrists and ankles, their weight forcing him to shuffle rather than walk. His face bore fresh bruises, evidence of conversations held in darkness with men who believed pain could extract truth or fabricate lies as needed. Yet despite the purple shadow beneath his left eye and the split in his lower lip, he held himself with a dignity that silenced some of the jeers that had begun at his appearance. "Look at him," a stonemason whispered to his apprentice. "He doesn't cower." "Pride before a fall," the boy replied, though his voice lacked conviction. 4 guards flanked Elias as they marched him toward the platform, where 3 figures awaited. A royal scribe clutching an official proclamation, a church official whose expression suggested he'd bitten into something rotten, and the kingdom's chief justice, a man whose commitment to law was matched only by his ambition for higher position within the council. The crowd's roar intensified as Elias mounted the stairs, his bare feet leaving small, damp prints on wood that had been scrubbed clean for the occasion. The guards positioned him at the center of the platform, directly before a wooden post worn smooth by the hands of previous condemned. There was no executioner's block, not yet. This was to be a public confession, not an immediate execution, though the headsman waited in the shadows behind a nearby tavern, sharpening his axe with slow, deliberate strokes. "Silence for the king's justice!" a herald shouted, his voice barely penetrating the din until guards banged their spear butts against the cobblestones in rhythmic warning. The Chief Justice stepped forward, his crimson robes catching the strengthening sunlight. "Elias of Westbrook," he intoned, using the peasant's village of origin rather than a family name he didn't possess. "You stand accused of high crimes against the crown and the sanctity of royal blood." A hush fell over the crowd, punctuated only by the distant cry of a hungry infant and the flutter of pigeons startled from nearby eaves. "You have claimed paternity of the child carried by our sovereign Queen Eleanor," the justice continued, his voice rising to carry to the farthest corners of the square. "You have confessed to entering Her Majesty's private chambers on multiple occasions. These acts constitute treason of the highest order." The church official stepped forward, his jowls quivering with righteous indignation. "Before justice is served upon your flesh, your immortal soul must be cleansed. Confess your sins fully. Renounce your false claims. Admit that you were coerced or paid by enemies of the crown to spread such vile falsehoods." Elias lifted his gaze, scanning the sea of faces surrounding him. Some wore expressions of hatred, others morbid curiosity, but here and there, scattered like rare flowers among weeds, he caught glimpses of something else. Compassion, doubt, perhaps even understanding. A serving girl with a basket of bread clutched to her chest. An old soldier missing an arm from some forgotten war. A midwife whose eyes held knowledge of life's mysteries beyond court politics. "I will speak," Elias said, his voice hoarse from thirst yet carrying clearly in the sudden stillness. The guards tensed, prepared to strike him should his words prove too inflammatory. The church official nodded eagerly. "Confess your lies, son. Save your soul, if not your body." Elias took a deep breath that sent pain shooting through ribs bruised during his questioning. "I will not speak lies to save either." His gaze swept across the crowd again, finding those scattered sympathetic faces like anchors in a storm. "What I have already said is truth. I make no claim to the Queen's crown or power. I have never sought wealth or position." A bitter smile touched his cracked lips. "As you can plainly see, I've achieved neither." A nervous titter ran through the crowd, quickly suppressed. "I claim only this, that love exists beyond the boundaries men create, that it can find root in the most unlikely soil." His voice strengthened with each word, as if the truth itself lent him power. "I met a woman, not first a queen, but first a woman, who saw me as more than the dirt beneath her shoes, who spoke to me of dreams and fears that had nothing to do with throne rooms, whose laughter at simple joys reminded me that beneath crowns and rags, we are all born naked and crying into the same world." The Chief Justice stepped forward, face darkening. "You will cease this seditious—" "I will speak." Elias's voice cracked like thunder, surprising even himself with its force. The crowd fell silent again, hungry for whatever might come next in this unprecedented drama. "You asked me to confess? Here is my confession. I love Eleanor. Not Her Majesty the Queen, though I respect her wisdom and strength, but Eleanor, the woman whose hands tremble when she speaks of her childhood fears, whose eyes light up at the sight of the first spring flowers, whose heart has been imprisoned by duty far longer and more cruelly than my body has been chained by your guards." Murmurs rippled through the assembly, no longer entirely hostile. The Chief Justice glanced nervously at the nobles' balconies, where several counselors watched with thunderous expressions. "And the child?" the church official demanded, attempting to wrest back control of the narrative. "You maintain your blasphemous claim." Elias's hand instinctively moved toward his heart, though the chains limited the gesture. "The child is a miracle neither of us expected. I offer no proof beyond my word, which you have already judged worthless." His gaze swept the crowd once more. "But consider this. For 30 years, the queen remained childless despite every prayer and medical intervention. Now she carries life within her. Call it God's will or nature's mystery, but do not call it a lie simply because it confounds your understanding. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The crowd's mood shifted perceptibly. Whispers exchanged, glances darting between the platform and the castle visible on the hill above. The story of a barren queen suddenly with child had elements of the miraculous that resonated with common folk raised on tales of divine intervention. "Enough of this heresy," the church official sputtered, but his outrage seemed hollow against Elias's quiet dignity. From the back of the crowd, a woman's voice called out, "Let him finish." Others took up the cry, "Let him speak, we want to hear." The Chief Justice raised his hands for silence, aware that losing control of the crowd would reflect poorly on his authority. "Speak your final words then, but know they change nothing of your sentence." Elias nodded, swallowing painfully against his parched throat. "I ask for nothing for myself, not mercy, not understanding, not even belief. But I ask this for her, for the woman behind the crown. Remember that queens are born as human as any tavern maid. Their hearts beat with the same fears and hopes. If you would condemn her for finding comfort in the arms of one deemed unworthy by birth, ask yourselves who among you would choose duty over love if forced to live decades without tenderness." A hush fell over the square, heavy with uncomfortable self-examination. The executioner, sensing his services might be delayed, settled back against the tavern wall and took a long pull from his flask. That night, a serving girl slipped through the shadows of the castle corridors, her footsteps silent on stone floors polished by centuries of similar secret journeys. She carried no tray this time, only a folded parchment pressed against her palm, as though its contents might burn through skin if exposed to air. 2 guards stood before the queen's chambers, their postures suggesting guardians rather than protectors, men placed to watch rather than serve. "A message for Her Majesty," the girl murmured, eyes downcast. "From Lady Cecily." The younger guard frowned. "The queen is not to be disturbed." Lady Cecily insisted it concerned fabrics for the royal birthing chamber. Women's matters. She infused the last words with just enough dismissive boredom to make the guards exchange glances of masculine disinterest. "Leave it then," the older guard grunted. "We'll see she gets it." Lady Cecily requested confirmation of receipt. "Her ladyship is most particular about these things." The girl's tone suggested endless feminine fussing over trivialities. With a sigh of resignation, the younger guard took the parchment, knocked once on the heavy door, and disappeared inside. Moments later, he returned. "Delivered," he confirmed curtly. Inside her chambers, Queen Eleanor broke the plain wax seal, not Lady Cecily's usual rose imprint, with trembling fingers. The message was brief, written in a careful hand designed to be legible rather than beautiful. "He spoke today, not for himself, but for you." The crowd listened. Some hearts turned. "Take courage. You are not alone." Eleanor pressed the parchment to her chest, feeling the child stir beneath her ribs as if responding to the surge of emotion that tightened her throat. Tears threatened, but she blinked them away. Tears were a luxury she could not afford when every lady-in-waiting and servant might report her weaknesses to the council. In his cell, Elias lay on damp straw, his body aching from the day's ordeal. The darkness was nearly complete, save for a thin shaft of moonlight that penetrated a high, narrow window. That small silver beam became his focus, a connection to the same sky Eleanor might be watching from her tower window. Did she know he had spoken for her today? Would she understand that he had already accepted whatever fate awaited him, so long as his words might ease her burden of isolation? The silence of the prison was broken by the scrape of a key in the lock. Elias tensed, expecting another interrogation, or worse, a silent blade in the darkness, solving the council's problem without public spectacle. Instead, a guard he hadn't seen before entered, carrying a small bundle. "Clean clothes," the man said gruffly. "And this." He placed a small loaf of bread beside Elias. "Not from me. From my wife. She was there today." The guard's weathered face revealed nothing, but his eyes held something new. Not quite respect, but absence of contempt. She said any man who could speak of love like that in the face of death deserves to meet his maker with dignity. The door closed and locked again before Elias could respond. He broke the bread, finding it still warm from the oven, studded with nuts and dried fruit. A peasant's celebration bread, saved for weddings and naming days. The simple kindness broke something inside him that beatings had not touched. He wept silently in the darkness, not for his impending death, but for the realization that truth, spoken plainly, held power that transcended station. Meanwhile, in Lord Harwick's chambers, counselors gathered in urgent, hushed consultation. The peasant becomes a symbol. Baron Westfield warned, swirling wine in a goblet, but not drinking. The common folk speak of him in taverns. Some even claim divine intervention in the Queen's condition. Martyrs are dangerous, Commander Blackwood agreed, his military mind assessing threats with cold precision. Kill him now, and half the kingdom might believe we silenced God's chosen messenger. Lord Harwick's fingers drummed against the arm of his chair. Then we don't kill him, we use him. His thin lips curved in a calculating smile. Every man has his breaking point, even one who speaks so prettily of love. Find it, break him. Make him renounce her publicly, and both their images crumbled to dust. The conspiracy deepened in flickering candlelight, unaware that the seeds of resistance were already taking root in the most unexpected places. A guard's compassionate wife, a serving girl's quiet courage, a crowd's reluctant admiration for a condemned man's dignity. The battle for the kingdom's soul had moved beyond council chambers into the hearts of its people. The kingdom's largest tavern, the Crowned Stag, heaved with bodies and conflicting opinions as the evening shadows lengthened. Smoke from tallow candles and clay pipes hung in layers beneath the low-beamed ceiling, creating a haze that stung the eyes and clothed every patron in the same gray shroud. The smell of spilled ale, unwashed bodies, and roasting meat created an atmosphere as thick with sensory assault as it was with dangerous talk. "Mark my words," bellowed Giles the blacksmith, his massive fist hitting the scarred oak table with enough force to make tankards jump. "The Queen's been enchanted. Common folk don't bed royalty unless dark arts are involved." His declaration carried the confidence of a man whose physical strength had rarely been challenged, even if his logic might be. "Horseshit," countered Agnes, a midwife whose advancing years and intimate knowledge of the community's most private moments granted her unusual speaking privileges among men. "I've helped birth enough bastards to know that lust requires no magic, only opportunity and flesh." She took a long swallow of her ale, wiping foam from her lips with a weathered hand. "And loneliness," she added more quietly, "can make even a queen's heart vulnerable." The tavern keeper, Thomas, leaned against the bar, his eyes constantly scanning for trouble, while his ears collected the kingdom's unfiltered opinions, a habit that had made his establishment a hub for information as vital as the castle's own war room. "They say he stood like a nobleman at the questioning," he offered, his voice pitched to carry just enough to stir the conversation without seeming to lead it. "Didn't break, didn't beg, spoke of the Queen like—" He hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't be treasonous. "Like a man who's seen the person behind the crown." "Still a dead man," grunted Hugh, a merchant whose wagons traveled to neighboring kingdoms with regularity. "Throne room or bedchamber, you don't enter royal spaces uninvited unless you're prepared to lose your head." He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a dramatic whisper that somehow projected even more effectively. "They're saying in Westmark that our enemies paid him, that he's part of a plot to destabilize the succession." This new theory rippled through the tavern, bouncing between tables and growing with each retelling, until it reached a corner where 3 castle servants sat nursing a single pitcher between them. The youngest, a scullery maid named Bess, snorted loudly enough to draw nearby attention. "Something funny, girl?" Hugh demanded, bristling at the implied challenge to his worldly knowledge. Bess flushed at the sudden scrutiny, but held her ground with the quiet defiance of one who has nothing left to lose. "Only that I've seen him, the peasant Elias, in the castle gardens for over a year before any of this happened. Always working, always alone." Her voice grew steadier as she continued. "Not once did I see him speak to anyone who wasn't giving him orders about which wall to fix or which row to weed. Some master spy he'd make, not knowing his letters and jumping like a startled rabbit whenever nobles passed by." Her testimony brought a moment of thoughtful silence before being drowned by a fresh wave of speculation. At a table near the hearth, a trio of off-duty soldiers debated their commander's loyalties. By the door, two farmers' wives wondered aloud if a child born of such a union would show common blood in its features. And at the bar, a hooded figure nursed a cup of wine, listening intently while contributing nothing. "I'll tell you this," declared a tanner whose perpetual stench ensured him a wide berth even in the crowded room. "If a low-born like him can tumble a queen, who's to say what's next? Peasants demanding fair wages, women choosing their own husbands." He laughed at the absurdity, revealing blackened teeth. "Next they'll say the sun rises in the west." "There's precedent," interjected a quiet voice from beneath the hood at the bar. The tavern's ambient roar dipped as heads turned toward this unexpected contributor. The figure pushed back the hood enough to reveal the weathered face of an elderly man, his eyes sharp despite his apparent frailty. Queen Adeline of the Southern Isles took a shipwright as consort 2 centuries past. Their son ruled for 40 years, one of their most prosperous periods. "Who might you be, grandfather?" Thomas the tavern keeper asked, professional curiosity mingling with natural wariness of strangers who knew obscure history. "No one of consequence," the old man replied, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Just a wandering scholar who reads too much and sleeps too little." He raised his cup in a small salute before continuing. "History remembers rulers for their wisdom or cruelty, their victories or defeats, not for whom they took to bed, unless the coupling itself changed the kingdom's course." His words might have sparked fresh debate had the tavern door not crashed open at that moment, admitting a breathless young boy whose wide eyes and heaving chest immediately commanded attention. "They're moving him," the lad gasped, the importance of his news evident in his disregard for protocol in an adult establishment. "The peasant. Guards are taking him to the East Tower, where they keep traitors before execution." The tavern erupted into chaos, patrons clamoring for details while fumbling for coins to settle tabs before rushing to spread the news. Amid the confusion, the hooded scholar slipped away unnoticed, his slight smile replaced by an expression of grim determination. Inside the castle's East Tower, Elias stumbled as guards shoved him into a circular chamber whose window slits were too narrow for anything but slivers of moonlight to penetrate. The room was sparsely furnished with a straw pallet, a wooden stool, and an iron bracket on the wall that held a guttering torch. Unlike the dungeon, this space held a sinister honor. It was reserved for prisoners significant enough to merit special attention before their public disposal. "Distinguished accommodations," remarked one guard with dark humor. "Last tenant was a duke who thought he'd make a better king. Spent his final night composing poetry about his own greatness." "How'd that work out for him?" Elias asked, his voice rough from days of minimal water. The guard's laugh held no mirth. "Birds ate well that day." He turned to leave, then paused. "Word of advice, peasant? Whatever they offer you tomorrow, take it. No woman's worth dying for, especially one who watches from a safe distance while your head rolls." Alone in the unfamiliar space, Elias sank onto the stool, its uneven legs wobbling beneath his weight. His body ached from repeated questioning, but the physical pain paled against the hollow ache of uncertainty. Not fear for himself, he had made peace with his likely fate, but fear for Eleanor, trapped among vipers with only her wits as defense. And for the child, innocent of politics yet already a pawn in a game of thrones. He pressed his palm against the stone wall, imagining Eleanor might be doing the same somewhere else in the vast castle. Could love penetrate solid rock? Could she feel his presence, his unwavering commitment? The moonlight shifted as clouds passed overhead, casting the cell into momentary darkness before reappearing. Like hope, Elias thought, never entirely extinguished, but maddeningly inconstant. In her royal chambers, Eleanor stood at the window, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other pressed against the glass that separated her from the night air. From this height, she could see the outline of the East Tower, a single light indicating occupancy. Her ladies-in-waiting had been dismissed for the evening, replaced by 2 attendants, whose real purpose was transparent, Lord Harwick's spies, reporting her every movement, every visitor, every whispered word. "Your Majesty should rest," suggested the elder of the two women, her solicitous tone belied by the sharpness of her gaze. "In your condition, adequate sleep is essential." "My condition," Eleanor replied with delicate emphasis, "makes rest elusive. The child is active tonight." She turned from the window, her face composed into the mask of serene authority she had perfected over 3 decades of rule. Perhaps some warm milk might help. "Would you be so kind?" The transparent ploy to gain momentary solitude worked. The attendant curtsied and departed to relay the request to the kitchens, leaving only the younger spy, who fidgeted nervously by the door. Eleanor seized the brief opportunity. "Tell Lord Harwick that I am neither blind nor feeble-minded," she said, her voice soft but edged with steel. "I recognize a cage, even one lined with silk." She moved closer to the startled young woman. "Also tell him that queens have long memories, and that fortunes rise and fall on royal favor. Consider carefully which side of history you wish to occupy when this matter resolves." The girl's face drained of color. I'm not." "Spare us both the performance," Eleanor cut in, her tone almost gentle. "Just deliver the message." Across the castle grounds, in Lord Harwick's opulent study, the council's inner circle huddled around a map of the kingdom spread across a table inlaid with exotic woods. Candelabras cast their faces in dramatic shadow, lending a conspiratorial atmosphere to a meeting that had, in fact, crossed firmly into conspiracy. "The peasant's public statement has complicated matters," Bishop Matthias admitted, his pudgy fingers drumming against his rounded belly. "The common folk speak of him with growing sympathy. Some even whisper of divine intervention." His expression soured. "As if God would choose a gardener for such a miracle." Baron Westfield snorted. "Divine or diabolical, the result is the same. Our position weakens while they gain symbolic power. The longer this drags on, the more legend overtakes reality." "Then we accelerate," Commander Blackwood stated flatly, the practical soldier emerging beneath the courtier's finery. "The peasant meets with an unfortunate accident tonight, a suicidal leap from his tower window, overcome by guilt for his treasonous claims." Lord Harwick shook his head slowly, his long fingers tracing the border between their kingdom and its most aggressive neighbor. "Death makes him a martyr now. No, we need him broken, not dead. Recanting his story publicly would destroy both their credibility." "And how do you propose to achieve that?" Lady Cecily asked from the doorway, her unannounced arrival causing several councillors to start guiltily. "He has faced imprisonment, beating, and the executioner's block without wavering." She entered the room fully, uninvited but untroubled by protocol. "What leverage remains?" Lord Harwick's thin lips curved in a smile entirely devoid of warmth. "Every man has something he values above his own life, my lady. For our love-struck peasant, the answer is obvious." His finger moved from the map to tap a miniature portrait of the Queen that hung on the wall. By dawn, he will face a choice: renounce his claims and live in distant exile, or maintain his truth and watch his beloved Queen stand trial for treason alongside him. The room fell silent as the implications settled over the conspirators. Even among those committed to removing the scandal, threatening the Queen herself represented a line crossed from which there could be no return. "The people would never accept charges against Her Majesty," Lady Cecily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The people," Lord Harwick replied, "will believe what we tell them to believe, especially when evidence suggests their beloved sovereign conspired with foreign powers to introduce common blood into the royal line, destabilizing the kingdom for generations to come." As midnight approached, the kingdom held its breath, unaware that the struggle for its future had moved beyond questions of scandal or propriety into dangerous new territory. In taverns, peasant cottages, and castle corridors, the story of the gardener and the Queen had transformed from salacious gossip to something more profound, a symbol that challenged the very foundations upon which their society was built. And in their separate towers, two people who had dared to love across an impossible divide gazed at the same moon, drawing strength from a connection that neither walls nor plots could sever completely. The coming dawn would bring choices that would echo through history. though whether as tragedy or triumph remained written in stars neither could fully read. The castle erupted into frenzied activity at dawn, servants scurrying through corridors like ants from a disturbed hill. Guards doubled at key positions, their faces grim beneath polished helmets that reflected the rising sun in blinding flashes. The tension that had simmered for days now boiled over, scalding anyone unfortunate enough to be caught in its path. A messenger staggered into the great hall, clutching a leather satchel to his chest as if it contained his own beating heart. His boots left muddy prints across marble floors that had been polished to mirror-like perfection only hours before. Lord Harwick, already seated at the head of the council table despite the early hour, raised an eyebrow at this breach of decorum, but said nothing as the messenger dropped to one knee, gasping for breath. "My lord," the man wheezed, "urgent dispatches from the northern border." His trembling hands fumbled with the satchel's clasp before extracting a scroll sealed with plain wax, the mark of a field commander rather than a noble emissary. Lord Harwick broke the seal with long, elegant fingers that belied their strength. His eyes scanned the contents, narrowing slightly, the only visible reaction to whatever news the message contained. Without comment, he passed the scroll to Commander Blackwood, whose weathered face darkened like a thundercloud as he read. "Is this verified?" the commander demanded, his voice carrying the gravel of a man who had shouted orders across battlefields for decades. The messenger nodded vigorously. "3 separate reports, my lord. The Night Watch captain recorded each sighting personally." Baron Westfield's patience evaporated. "Would someone enlighten those of us who haven't developed the ability to read minds?" Blackwood placed the scroll on the table with deliberate care, as if the parchment itself might bite. "The Night Watch logs. Comprehensive records confirming that the peasant Elias visited the Queen's chambers on multiple occasions over the past year. Not merely rumors or servants' gossip, official documentation signed by men whose reliability has never been questioned. The revelation landed in the chamber like a physical blow. Several council members inhaled sharply. One elderly duke crossed himself reflexively. "Then there can be no more denial," Bishop Matthias declared, jowls quivering with indignation poorly disguised as moral outrage. "The evidence confirms everything." "It confirms his presence," Lady Cecily noted, her voice cutting through the rising murmurs like a blade through silk. "The purpose of those visits remains." "Do not insult our intelligence, my lady," Baron Westfield interrupted, his face flushing. "The peasant himself has already proclaimed the nature of their association publicly. These records merely provide the damning proof." Lord Harwick rose slowly, commanding the room's attention without raising his voice, a skill refined through decades of court intrigue. "The matter has moved beyond speculation. We face unprecedented crisis." He paused, ensuring every eye was fixed upon him before continuing. "The Queen must address these allegations directly. No more strategic silence." Nods of agreement rippled around the table, though the expressions behind them varied from grim satisfaction to reluctant acceptance. "And if she refuses?" Lady Cecily asked, the only voice that dared challenge the gathering consensus. Lord Harwick's smile never reached his eyes. "Then the council must act to protect the realm from a monarch whose judgment has been compromised." The threat in his measured tone was unmistakable. Across the castle in the East Tower, Elias woke to the sound of his cell door swinging open. Sleep had come in fitful bursts, leaving him more exhausted than refreshed. He blinked against the sudden intrusion of torchlight, raising a hand to shield eyes accustomed to darkness. 2 guards entered, followed by a figure whose fine clothing and imperious bearing marked him as nobility despite his youth. Lord Edmund, the Queen's nephew by marriage, regarded the prisoner with undisguised contempt, mingled with something harder to identify. Perhaps curiosity. "Leave us," he commanded the guards, who exchanged uncertain glances before complying. Once alone with the prisoner, Edmund circled the small space like a predator assessing prey. "So you're the gardener who would be king," he remarked, his aristocratic drawl stretching each syllable into a subtle mockery. Elias remained seated on his pallet, refusing to scramble to his feet like a supplicant. "I've claimed no crown, my lord, only a woman's heart." Edmund barked a laugh devoid of humor. "A convenient distinction. Tell me, do you imagine she would have looked twice at you had she been a milkmaid rather than a queen? Does your affection extend to the woman without her power and position? The question struck deeper than Edmund could know, touching a doubt Elias had wrestled with during countless sleepless nights. Would he have noticed Eleanor if she weren't the queen? Would she have seen anything in him beyond another pair of hands to tend her gardens? The uncertainty must have shown on his face, for Edmund's expression shifted to one of triumphant disdain. As I suspected, the nobleman sneered. Your romantic delusions dissolve when faced with reality. Elias found his voice again, steadier than he felt. You misunderstand my hesitation, my lord. I question not my love for her, but whether our paths would have crossed at all in a different world. He met Edmund's gaze directly, a breach of etiquette that clearly rankled the younger man. I love the woman who stops to admire wildflowers others trample without seeing, who speaks of books and stars with equal passion, who carries the weight of a kingdom yet still finds space in her heart for kindness to those beneath her notice. Something flickered across Edmund's face, irritation at not achieving the easy victory he'd anticipated. He changed tactics, moving to stare out the narrow window slit. Poetic sentiments won't save either of you now. The night watch logs have been discovered, official records documenting your visits to her chambers. Elias felt ice water replace the blood in his veins, though he fought to maintain his composure. Those visits had been arranged with such care, such secrecy. Guards had been bribed, passages mapped, timings meticulously planned. For records to exist meant betrayal at the highest levels. The council moves to depose her, Edmund continued, watching Elias's reaction from the corner of his eye. Treason charges will follow. The penalty for a monarch who betrays her sacred trust is most unpleasant. He turned fully to face the prisoner. Unless, the implied proposition hung in the air between them, needing no elaboration. Denial, recantation, the sacrifice of truth for Eleanor's safety. Elias's mouth went dry, his heart hammering against his ribs with such force he feared it might be visible through his thin shirt. Why tell me this? Why not simply proceed with your plans? Edmund's smile was cold and calculating, revealing ambition that outstripped his years. A public recanting by you would resolve this matter far more cleanly. The scandal could be buried, the Queen's reputation salvaged, if somewhat tarnished. A regency council would guide the kingdom until the child comes of age. He did not need to specify who would feature prominently on such a council. And my reward for this betrayal? Elias asked, though he already knew the answer. Your life, Edmund replied simply. Exile rather than execution. Perhaps even comfortable arrangements, provided you remain far from court and never speak of this again. Elias closed his eyes briefly, the magnitude of the choice crushing him like a physical weight. Deny his love, deny their child, and Eleanor might retain her throne, albeit with diminished authority. Stand firm in truth, and they both faced destruction. When he opened his eyes again, determination had replaced uncertainty. I must speak with her before I decide. Edmund laughed outright. You're hardly in position to make demands. Not a demand, Elias countered. A necessity. Would you have me trust your word alone that she would be spared? That my sacrifice would guarantee her safety? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Let me see her once more. Then you'll have your answer. For a long moment, Edmund studied him with narrowed eyes, weighing calculations too complex to vocalize. Finally, he nodded curtly. I'll arrange it, tonight, when fewer eyes watch. But know this, peasant. Any attempt to use this meeting for purposes beyond what we've discussed will end poorly for you both. As Edmund departed, Elias sank back onto the pallet, trembling now that no adversary remained to witness his weakness. The light through the window indicated mid-morning, giving him hours to contemplate impossible choices. His fingers traced patterns in the dust on the floor, nonsensical swirls that somehow became a crude sketch of Eleanor's profile. In her chambers, Queen Eleanor received the news of the night watch logs with outward calm that masked the storm raging within. Her ladies-in-waiting had been dismissed, or rather replaced by women loyal to the council, leaving her alone with Lady Cecily, the only ally brave enough to maintain open support. "They'll demand you deny him publicly," Cecily stated, pacing the perimeter of the room while checking for hidden listeners, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid days earlier, but now felt woefully inadequate. Eleanor sat at her writing desk, quill poised over parchment, though she had written nothing. "And if I refuse?" Her voice carried the weariness of one who had fought too many battles in too short a time. Deposition at best, charges of treason at worst. Cecily's bluntness was one of the qualities Eleanor had always valued, even when the truth cut deep. They have the votes in council, the support of the church, and enough of the military to enforce their will. Eleanor's hand drifted to her belly, where the child had been unusually active since dawn, as if sensing the danger surrounding them. "And the people? What do they say?" Cecily's expression softened slightly. "They're divided. The nobility largely condemns, the common folk increasingly support, particularly since Elias spoke at his public questioning." She hesitated before adding, "There are even whispers that the pregnancy itself is a divine sign, a miracle granted to a barren queen." A mirthless smile touched Eleanor's lips. Divine or merely human, it matters little now. She set down her quill, ink drying unused. "What would you have me do, old friend? Deny him to save my crown? Claim madness or coercion? Or stand firm and watch everything I've built crumble around me?" The question hung between them, impossible to answer, yet demanding response. Cecily moved to kneel beside Eleanor's chair, taking the Queen's hand in her own. A breach of protocol forgiven by 3 decades of friendship. "I would have you follow your heart," she said softly, "while allowing your head a vote in the matter." Her fingers tightened around Eleanor's. "You've sacrificed personal happiness for duty since you were 16. Perhaps it's time the kingdom sacrificed for you." A sharp knock interrupted them. The door opened without waiting for permission, revealing Lord Edmund with 2 guards flanking him. His bow barely satisfied the minimum requirements of respect. "Your Majesty," he began, his tone suggesting the title might soon be obsolete. "The Council requests your presence this evening to address certain revelations that have come to light." His eyes flicked briefly to her abdomen before returning to her face. "The Council requests?" Eleanor repeated, emphasis transforming the words into quiet challenge. "Do I remain queen of this realm, or have I been deposed while engaged in correspondence?" She gestured to her writing desk, the blank parchment somehow lending weight to her performance of normalcy. Edmund had the grace to flush slightly. "Of course, Your Majesty. The Council humbly seeks an audience at your convenience. Then I shall receive them after Vespers." Eleanor rose, her posture regal despite the emotional tempest threatening to overwhelm her. "Is there anything else, nephew?" The familial address, a reminder of connections that bound them beyond political maneuvering, clearly discomfited him. "There is one matter," he admitted reluctantly. "The prisoner Elias has requested an audience with you before the council convenes." Cecily inhaled sharply, but Eleanor's expression remained impassive. "For what purpose?" "He would not say," Edmund replied, though something in his manner suggested otherwise. The council felt that denying this request might inflame the situation unnecessarily. Understanding bloomed in Eleanor's mind with crystal clarity. They hoped Elias would convince her to deny everything, to sacrifice their truth for mutual preservation. A tactical retreat that would leave the council victorious without the messiness of formal deposition. "Very well," she agreed, her voice betraying nothing of her racing thoughts. "I shall see him at sunset, in the Chapel Royal. Sacred ground may remind us all of the value of truth." Edmund bowed again, deeper this time, though whether from respect or to hide his expression remained unclear. As he withdrew with his guards, Cecily turned to Eleanor with wide eyes. "The Chapel Royal? Are you certain?" Eleanor moved to the window, gazing out at the kingdom that had been both her prison and her purpose for 30 years. The sun had passed its zenith, beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, toward sunset, toward choices that would echo through history. "If we must face judgment," she said quietly, "let it begin in a place where kings and queens are reminded they answer to powers greater than themselves." Sunset painted the Chapel Royal in amber and crimson, streaming through stained glass windows that transformed ordinary light into divine illumination. Dust motes danced in colored beams like spirits caught between worlds. The ancient stone walls had witnessed 8 generations of royal weddings, coronations, and funerals, silent observers to the kingdom's most pivotal moments. Now they would bear witness to another. Guards positioned Elias near the altar, his chains removed, but freedom clearly an illusion with armed men at every exit. He stood with his back to the massive rose window, its intricate design casting a kaleidoscope of colors across his simple clothing. Despite days of imprisonment and interrogation, he maintained a dignity that seemed incongruous with his station. Back straight, gaze steady, hands relaxed at his sides rather than fidgeting or clasped in supplication. The chapel door creaked open, its ancient hinges announcing the Queen's arrival before she became visible. Eleanor entered alone, having dismissed her attendants at the threshold despite their protests. Her gown was slate blue, unadorned save for a silver chain that had been a gift from her father. No crown sat upon her silver-streaked hair, which had been arranged in a simple braid rather than the elaborate styles court protocol typically demanded. This choice was deliberate. She came not as monarch, but as woman. Elias felt his heart constrict at the sight of her. How small she appeared without her usual entourage, how human without the trappings of royalty. Yet the subtle swell of her abdomen beneath the fabric rendered her more beautiful to him than any ornate regalia ever could. He fought the urge to rush forward, acutely aware of the guards whose hands hovered near sword hilts, waiting for any excuse. Eleanor approached with measured steps until barely an arm's length separated them. Protocol crumbled beneath the weight of their shared gaze. No bow, no curtsy, no formal address. For several heartbeats, they simply looked at one another, communicating in a language more ancient than words. "They've found the Night Watch records," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying perfectly in the chapel's acoustic embrace. "So I've been informed," Elias replied, matching her tone. Lord Edmund was most thorough in explaining the consequences. A sad smile touched Eleanor's lips. Edmund was always ambitious, even as a child. He sees opportunity where others see crisis. Her hand moved unconsciously to her belly, a protective gesture that didn't escape Elias's notice. "The council demands I deny everything publicly. They promise a regency rather than deposition if I comply. And they've offered me exile rather than execution for the same denial," Elias added, bitter irony coloring his words. How generous our judges have become. A guard shifted position, boots scraping against stone, a pointed reminder that their conversation, though quiet, was not private. Eleanor took another step closer, her voice dropping further. "Half the kingdom whispers that our child cannot possibly exist, that a woman my age could not conceive without trickery or divine intervention." The pain behind her composed expression pierced Elias more deeply than any physical torture could have. "The other half claims you bewitched me, or worse, that I've lost my reason along with my virtue." Elias fought to keep his own expression neutral, though rage and tenderness waged war within him. "And what do you believe?" he asked, the question laden with meaning beyond the immediate crisis. Eleanor's eyes, those eyes that had first truly seen him across the garden, that had widened with surprise at his knowledge of rare flowers, that had softened with unexpected emotion during their clandestine conversations, now held his gaze with unwavering certainty. "I believe that love arrives without permission or planning," she answered. "I believe that 30 years of duty earned me the right to know joy, however briefly." Her voice trembled slightly before steadying. "And I believe that our child is neither miracle nor abomination, but simply the natural consequence of 2 people who found each other against impossible odds." The chapel seemed to hold its breath. Even the guards appeared momentarily transfixed, caught in the gravity of a truth so simple yet revolutionary, it threatened to upend the very foundations of their society. Elias reached forward slowly, telegraphing his movement to avoid alarming the guards, and took Eleanor's hand in his. The touch, their first since his imprisonment, sent electricity through both of them. His calloused fingers against her softer skin embodied the very divide they had dared to bridge. "Then we face the same choice," he said. Deny our truth and live half-lives apart, or stand firm and face whatever comes together. A commotion outside the chapel doors shattered the moment. Raised voices, the clatter of armor, footsteps approaching with urgent purpose. Eleanor withdrew her hand reluctantly, composing herself into the queen once more as the doors burst open. Lord Harwick entered, flanked by Commander Blackwood and Bishop Matthias, with several council members trailing behind. Their unexpected arrival carried the unmistakable stench of desperation, men who had discovered their carefully orchestrated plans unraveling. "Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty," Harwick said, bowing with precise depth that somehow managed to convey insolence rather than respect. "Urgent matters have arisen that could not await the scheduled council meeting." Eleanor regarded them with the cool appraisal that had intimidated ambassadors and generals for decades. What matter could be so pressing that it warrants disrupting a private audience in sacred space? Bishop Matthias stepped forward, his jowls quivering with indignation, poorly disguised as pious concern. "Rumors spread through the capital like wildfire, Your Majesty. Dangerous talk that threatens the very stability of the realm." "Rumors are your urgent matter?" Eleanor's voice dripped with skepticism. "I was unaware that court gossip now constituted state emergency." Commander Blackwood, ever the blunt instrument, cut through the verbal sparring. "The people speak of divine intervention in your condition, Your Majesty. They gather in markets and taverns, claiming God himself has blessed your union with this peasant." His scarred face twisted with distaste. "Some even whisper that to oppose this match is to oppose heaven's will." The revelation hung in the air like smoke, thick, acrid, impossible to ignore. The spiritual dimension transformed what had been merely scandal into potential revolution. If common folk believed divine approval sanctified a relationship between queen and peasant, centuries of carefully maintained class boundaries might collapse. "I see," Eleanor said, her tone revealing nothing of the calculation racing behind her composed features. "And you fear that allowing us this meeting feeds such speculation?" "We fear," Lord Harwick interjected smoothly, "that delay serves none of us. The kingdom balanced on a precipice." He gestured toward Elias with elegant disdain. "This man has been offered terms that preserve his life. You, Your Majesty, have been presented with a path that maintains your crown, if not its full authority. Further indecision merely prolongs a crisis that threatens to consume us all." Elias felt the weight of every eye upon him, Eleanor's, searching for guidance he had no right to give. The council members, hoping for capitulation. The guards, curious how a common man would face such pressure. The moment demanded a decision that would echo through however many days remained to him. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "I might speak with Her Majesty alone for a few moments more, to finalize our understanding of these generous terms." Lord Harwick's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Whatever must be said can be said before the council. We are past secrets now." "Indeed we are," Eleanor agreed, surprising her adversaries with sudden compliance. She turned to face Elias fully, her expression softening with unmistakable tenderness that caused several counselors to shift uncomfortably. "Speak freely, Elias of Westbrook. What would you have me understand?" The use of his full name, acknowledging his identity beyond peasant or prisoner, was not lost on those present. Elias squared his shoulders, finding strength he hadn't known remained after days of deprivation and questioning. "I would have you understand that I release you from any obligation to me," he said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the chapel. "That your crown and kingdom must take precedence over any personal attachment." A flicker of pain crossed Eleanor's face before royal discipline reasserted control. Lord Harwick failed to suppress a triumphant smile, believing victory secured. "However," Elias continued, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's, "I cannot and will not deny what exists between us. I will not call love a lie to save my own life." The council members exchanged alarmed glances as their carefully constructed solution began to unravel. Bishop Matthias's face purpled with rage, while Commander Blackwood's hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt. "You would condemn her alongside yourself?" Lord Harwick demanded, abandoning pretense of respect. "This stubbornness serves no one. On the contrary, Elias replied with unexpected authority. "It serves truth, and truth, my lords, has a power beyond your schemes and calculations." He addressed Eleanor directly once more. "I will accept whatever fate you deem necessary for the kingdom's welfare, but I will not stand before God in his own house and deny what we both know to be true." The chapel fell silent save for the distant call of evening birds and the soft hiss of candle flames. Eleanor's gaze remained locked with Elias's, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them in the space of several heartbeats. Finally, she turned to face her council, her posture transforming before their eyes from woman to monarch. "You have heard him speak. Now you will hear your queen." Her voice rang with authority that brooked no interruption. "I will address the kingdom tomorrow at midday from the great balcony. All shall hear my decision regarding these matters." "Your Majesty," Lord Harwick began, but Eleanor silenced him with a single raised hand. "Until then, Elias of Westbrook remains under my personal protection within the chapel grounds. Any harm befalling him will be considered direct treason against the crown." Her gaze swept the assembled councillors, challenging any to object. The audience is concluded. As Eleanor departed, her steps measured and dignified, the council members followed in disgruntled procession, leaving Elias once more under guard but with a curious new status, neither free nor condemned, suspended between worlds just as their child existed between stations. Outside the chapel, twilight descended upon a kingdom holding its collective breath. In taverns and great houses alike, speculation mounted about what declaration would come with tomorrow's sun. Common folk spoke in hushed tones of love that defied boundaries, while nobles whispered fearfully of precedents that might undermine the very foundations of their privilege. And in her private chambers, Queen Eleanor stood at her window, one hand pressed against glass still warm from the day's heat, the other cradling the life within her, a life created neither for political advantage nor dynastic security, but from the most revolutionary act possible in her position, choosing love over calculation, humanity over crown. Tomorrow would bring either vindication or destruction. Tonight offered only the cold comfort of truth upheld and the bittersweet knowledge that, whatever came next, neither she nor Elias had betrayed what mattered most. Daybreak arrived with uncharacteristic clarity, as if the heavens themselves had swept away clouds to better witness what would unfold. The castle grounds hummed with activity from first light. Servants polishing brass fixtures, guards in ceremonial armor positioning themselves along processional routes, stable boys rushing to clear streets of anything that might mar the historic occasion. By mid-morning, the great square before the palace teemed with humanity, a living tapestry of the kingdom's entire social hierarchy pressed together in unprecedented proximity. Nobles claimed the choicest viewing positions on specially constructed platforms, their silks and velvets creating islands of color amid the sea of homespun wool and linen worn by common folk. Merchants stood with their families in the middle ground, prosperity granting them space that poverty could not purchase. At the square's edges, peasants jostled for position, climbing onto carts and each other's shoulders for glimpses of the royal balcony where their queen would soon appear. The cathedral bells tolled 11 times, their sonorous echoes rippling across rooftops, to reach even the farthest corners of the capital. 1 hour remained before Queen Eleanor would address her people. 1 hour of fevered speculation and whispered prayers that cascaded through the crowd in waves. "They say she'll abdicate rather than deny him," a baker's wife confided to her neighbor, flour still dusting her forearms from the morning's work. "Nonsense," replied an elderly cobbler, his gnarled hands gesturing emphatically. "The nobles would never permit it. They'll force her to denounce the peasant and be done with this foolishness." A young mother shifted her infant to her other hip, her expression thoughtful. "My grandmother says queens are women first, just as we are. That crowns don't change what the heart wants." "Your grandmother speaks treason," hissed a merchant nearby, though his voice lacked conviction. Something about this scandal had touched even those who initially condemned it. The simplicity of love against a lifetime of duty resonated in ways few could articulate, but many felt deeply. Inside the castle, Eleanor sat before her mirror as her most trusted lady-in-waiting arranged her hair with trembling fingers. The queen had chosen her attire with deliberate care, neither the full ceremonial regalia that would emphasize her royal authority nor the simplicity that might suggest capitulation. Instead, she wore a gown of deep crimson, the color of both passion and sacrifice, adorned only with the royal signet ring and a simple gold circlet. "The council awaits in the antechamber, Your Majesty," Lady Cecily reported, her usually composed features tight with anxiety. "Lord Harwick insists on reviewing your declaration before you deliver it." A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. "I imagine he does." She studied her reflection, the silver threading through once auburn hair, the fine lines marking decades of both laughter and worry, the subtle changes pregnancy had wrought upon a body she had believed beyond such transformation. "He will wait in vain. They're saying," Cecily hesitated, lowering her voice though they were alone, "that contingency plans have been prepared. Guards loyal to the council positioned throughout the crowd. If your words do not meet with approval, then they will act," Eleanor finished calmly. "I have suspected as much since dawn." She rose, adjusting the circlet with practiced precision. 30 years I have served this kingdom, Cecily. 30 years of placing duty before desire, protocol before personal happiness. Today I claim the right to speak truth, whatever consequences may follow." In the chapel royal, Elias knelt before the altar, though his prayers were not what the watching priests might have assumed. He did not beg divine intervention nor seek forgiveness for loving beyond his station. Instead, he offered gratitude for the miracle of connection that had bridged impossible distance, between peasant and queen, between solitude and understanding, between duty and desire. The chapel door opened, admitting Commander Blackwood with 4 guards. The commander's scarred face revealed nothing as he approached the kneeling figure. "It is time," he stated simply. "You will accompany us to witness the Queen's address." Elias rose slowly, noting the absence of chains. "Am I to appear as a free man, then?" A muscle twitched in Blackwood's jaw. "You appear as the Queen commanded, neither prisoner nor freeman until her declaration settles your status." Something resembling reluctant respect flickered in his eyes. Few men face death with such composure. Fewer still would refuse an easy path to safety. There is no easy path when truth stands on one side and survival on the other, Elias replied, straightening his simple tunic, the only concession to appearance the guards had permitted. Blackwood studied him with the calculating assessment of a career soldier. "You truly love her," he said finally. Not a question, but a realization. "Beyond reason," Elias acknowledged. "Beyond station or consequence." The commander nodded once, a gesture that conveyed understanding without acceptance. "Then let us hope your love brings her wisdom rather than ruin." The journey from chapel to viewing platform passed in tense silence. Guards created a narrow corridor through the crowd, who responded to Elias's appearance with a cacophony of contradictory reactions. Jeers and cheers, blessings and curses. A young girl darted forward to press a wildflower into his hand, before being pulled back by her horrified mother. Elias clutched the simple bloom, its fragile petals a reminder of the garden where he had first spoken with Eleanor. From a side entrance to the royal balcony, Eleanor heard the crowd's reaction to Elias's appearance. Her hands, steady through diplomatic crises and military campaigns, trembled slightly as she adjusted her circlet one final time. Lord Harwick appeared at her elbow, his thin face tight with barely controlled fury. "It is not too late to reconsider, Your Majesty," he urged, dropping all pretense of deference. "The future of the monarchy itself hangs upon your next words." Eleanor met his gaze directly, the full weight of her royal authority evident despite her lack of ceremonial regalia. "Indeed it does, Lord Harwick, though perhaps not in the manner you imagine." She moved toward the balcony entrance, adding over her shoulder, "I suggest you prepare yourself for change. It comes whether we welcome it or not." Sunlight bathed the royal balcony as Eleanor stepped into view of her assembled subjects. The crowd's roar, thousands of voices merging into a single wordless expression, washed over her like a physical force before diminishing into expectant silence. From her elevated position, she could see the kingdom in microcosm. Nobility and common folk, merchants and clerics, soldiers and farmers, all waiting for words that would shape their collective future. On a platform to her right, positioned where she could see him but separated by guards and protocol, stood Elias. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, a private connection in the most public of moments. He nodded almost imperceptibly, a gesture that contained both support and acceptance of whatever she might decide. Eleanor raised her hands, and the last whispers faded into complete silence. When she spoke, her voice carried with the clarity and authority that 3 decades of rule had perfected. "My people," she began, the simple address already a departure from formal protocol that typically acknowledged nobility first. "For 30 years I have served this kingdom, first alongside my husband King Richard, and then alone after his passing. In those years, I have placed the crown's interests above my own in all matters, from treaties to taxation, from war to peace." She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep across the assembly. "Many of you know me only as your queen, a figure on coins, a name in proclamations, a distant authority whose decisions shape your lives without your consultation." Another pause, this one weighted with significance. "Today I speak to you not only as your sovereign, but as a woman who has discovered that duty without humanity becomes an empty ritual." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, quickly hushed as she continued. "You have heard rumors and accusations. You have witnessed a man of humble birth claim connection to your queen that tradition deems impossible. You have been told that such connection threatens the very foundation of our society." Her hand moved briefly to rest upon her belly, the gesture drawing gasps from those close enough to observe it. "What you have not been told is that hearts recognize no boundaries of rank or station, that love, genuine and unexpected, may appear where protocol insists it cannot exist." On their elevated platform, several council members shifted uneasily. Bishop Matthias's face had turned an alarming shade of purple, while Lord Harwick's expression hardened into marble. "I stand before you carrying a child," Eleanor declared, her voice unwavering despite the unprecedented nature of her confession. "A child conceived not through political calculation or dynastic necessity, but through love that arrived unbidden and unwelcome, yet proved impossible to deny." The crowd's reaction defied simple description. Shock and wonder, outrage and awe, all mingled in a rising tide of sound that threatened to overwhelm her next words. Eleanor waited, regal patience allowing the initial response to crest and recede before she continued. "Those who counsel me insist this truth must be buried, that I must deny what my heart knows to be real, or forfeit the crown I have worn since girlhood." Her gaze found Elias again, drawing strength from his steady presence. "They ask me to choose between the woman I am and the queen I have become." She straightened, her diminutive stature somehow expanding with the power of absolute conviction. "I refuse this false choice. The monarchy exists to serve the kingdom, not to preserve its own traditions at the expense of human dignity. If a queen cannot speak truth, what hope have her subjects for justice? If love must be denied in the name of protocol, what values do we truly defend?" Lord Harwick stepped forward, his movement clearly intended to interrupt what had become dangerous territory, but Eleanor silenced him with a single raised hand, a gesture of authority so ingrained that even in this moment of crisis, he found himself obeying. "I do not ask your approval," she told the crowd, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I ask only your understanding that beneath crowns and titles, nobility and common birth, we share the same human heart, capable of error, worthy of compassion, designed for connection." She extended her hands, palms upward in a gesture of openness rarely seen from monarchy. "I will not renounce this man whose only crime was loving beyond his station. I will not declare our child a product of deception or political manipulation. I will not sacrifice truth upon the altar of convenience." The finality of her declaration hung in the air like the moment between lightning and thunder. Eleanor's voice softened, though it carried no less authority. "What happens next rests in your hands, my people. If you deem me unfit to rule because I have chosen honesty over expedience, love over calculation, then I accept your judgment. But know this, whatever title I bear tomorrow, I remain Eleanor, imperfect, human, and finally, after 30 years of service, true to herself as well as her kingdom. As she stepped back from the balcony edge, the crowd's reaction exploded, not in unified voice, but in the chaotic symphony of thousands of individual responses. Some cheered with tears streaming down weathered faces. Others shouted condemnation or stood in stunned silence. Nobles exchanged alarmed glances while commoners debated passionately. The strict social boundaries temporarily dissolved in the face of unprecedented royal vulnerability. Elias remained motionless on his platform, overwhelmed by Eleanor's courage and the realization that their private love had transformed into something far greater, a challenge to centuries of rigid tradition, a question posed to an entire society about the nature of worth and dignity. As guards escorted Eleanor from the balcony, the future hung suspended between possibility and tradition. No certainty existed beyond this truth, that love, once named and honored, could never again be contained within the boundaries that custom had drawn around it. And perhaps in a kingdom where even a queen could stand before her people with such vulnerability, something new might grow from soil that had seemed too rigid for change. Something as unexpected and resilient as wildflowers pushing through stone. Love and duty, tradition and change, status and humanity. Our story challenges the boundaries we so often accept without question. Queen Eleanor and Elias risked everything, crown, freedom, life itself, for a connection that transcended the rigid hierarchies of their world. Would you have the courage to stand before an entire kingdom and choose truth over safety, love over tradition, authenticity over power? Perhaps the most profound revolutions aren't fought with swords or won with armies, but sparked in the human heart when someone dares to ask, why must it be this way? The queen and her gardener remind us that beneath titles and stations, beneath silks and rags, we share the same capacity for love, the same desire for connection, the same need to be seen for who we truly are, rather than what others demand we become. If this story touched your heart, remember that its echoes exist in our world too. Whenever someone challenges the boundaries others have drawn around them, whenever love finds a path where none seemed possible. Share this tale with those who might need courage to stand in their truth. Leave a comment about what you might have done in their place, and subscribe to hear more stories that remind us what it means to be imperfectly, beautifully human.